Hey, this is Joe with Grow It Build It, and today we're going to talk all about the Eastern Redbud tree. When it comes to landscaping, flowering trees are an immensely popular choice, and it isn't hard to see why. You see them everywhere, businesses, government buildings, and all over residential landscapes. I mean, who doesn't love a burst of color in spring while the rest of nature is just waking up? But today I want to go into one particular species, a native, the Eastern Redbud tree. I love seeing this tree in spring, whether it's putting on a shockingly gorgeous display in the open or providing pink accents to an otherwise drab forest. And there is a strong argument that the Eastern Redbud is the most gorgeous of all flowering trees, with its thousands of pink flowers growing directly from the trunk. But redbuds offer much more beyond beauty. Since they are native, they evolved to benefit the local ecosystem immensely. And you'll see that in this video, how bees visit the flowers and caterpillars feed on its leaves, as well as other ways that they benefit birds. I got started with redbuds about 7 years ago when I grew my first one from seed. And since then I've grown many, even relocating one a few times. And in this video I'm going to share with you everything you need to know about this tree. It's a total profile. By the end of this video, you will know what the Eastern Redbud is and its pros and cons, as well as all the ways that it benefits wildlife, how to identify the tree, its growing conditions, use it in landscaping as well as care for and maintain it, how to grow it from seed and save the seed, and then we will review. But without further ado, let's take a closer look. So, what is the Eastern Redbud? Well, the Eastern Redbud tree is a deciduous flowering tree native to North America and Canada. Scientifically, it's known as Cercis canadensis, and it can grow 20 to 30 feet tall and wide in proper conditions. A legume, it blooms showy pink flowers in spring, attracting numerous pollinators and is a host for several species of butterfly and moth caterpillar. Now, there are also several naturally occurring subspecies and varieties of this tree. There is the Texas Redbud, which is smaller and more drought tolerant and is native in central Texas to North Oklahoma, and likewise the Mexican Redbud, which is smaller and drought tolerant and is native to southwest Texas and northwest Mexico. And then finally there is a white variety of redbud, which was discovered as a natural mutation in a nursery in 1903, and it has all the same characteristics as the Eastern Redbud, but just with white flowers. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to only be talking about the parent species, Cercis canadensis, which has the largest range and is quite adaptable. And when it comes to the native range, the primary range is from Texas to Florida, then north to Iowa and Pennsylvania, Connecticut, and southern Ontario, Canada. It has become established in other states outside its native range, most likely due to its popular choice as a landscaping tree. But let's talk about some pros and cons. Well, the first pro has got to be beauty. The flowers of the Eastern Redbud are incredibly showy. Thousands of small pink and white pea-shaped flowers occurring in clusters on the branches and trunk make a stunning display. And another benefit here, a hidden benefit if you will, is that if it's planted within its native range, it's always going to bloom. And this is more of an advantage that redbuds have over other flowering trees. What I mean is many people in my area, for example, will plant magnolias or non-native cherry trees in their yards, which are native to warmer climates. While they can survive up here in my zone 6, they had evolved somewhere warmer, which means that while the magnolias and cherry trees can survive and bloom, they will bloom much earlier than everything else. And this may seem like an advantage. Some years, maybe 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 10 years, we'll get a very late cold snap that damages or kills all the flowers before they even bloom at all. So the homeowner gets no floral display. But a redbud within its native range will not have that problem. Alright, so the next pro is the size. So when it comes to planting trees, a lot of people are nervous about planting a tree that might grow 80, 100 feet near their house. Well, the redbud is very compact. It's 20 to 30 feet tall maximum. So this makes it possible to be used in landscaping for almost any yard. You know, if you're looking for a nice looking tree and want to support pollinators, but you don't want a massive oak, maple, or cherry, this will do that. Fast growing. Redbuds are one of the fastest growing trees around, easily growing 2 feet per year when planted in optimum growing conditions. So this is the specimen at my house. I germinated it in the spring of 2017, and I planted it out at the end of that year. And I've actually relocated 2 times, and now it's around 12 feet tall. So that's 7 years total, but only 6 of which were in the ground. As you can see this progression right here, it really does grow about 2 feet per year. You can see here I'm holding the camera at eye level and I got it tilted up to see, and I'm just over 6 foot tall. Also in 2022 was the first year I got flowers. Look at it, a single cluster in all its glory. But it really does grow about 2 feet per year in full sun and medium moist soil. Also in 2024, I did actually measure to the tallest branch, which is there on the left, and it was just over 12 feet. So, I mean, it is growing approximately 2 feet per year since 2018, which was its first growing season in the soil. And as you can tell from all this, it'll take 5 to 7 years in the ground to get a nice flowering from the tree. Adaptable. The eastern redbud can grow in a wide variety of conditions, and this makes it a possible choice for many homes. As long as you aren't in the really cold parts of North America, a desert, or a swamp, you can probably grow this tree. Okay, so now we're going to go to our last pro, which is how it supports wildlife, and this will be a little more detailed. But when it comes to the flowers of the redbud will attract numerous species of bees and several butterflies. In fact, there's over 50 species of pollinators that have been observed visiting the flowers. And these flowers don't just stop at pollinators, they even serve the birds directly, as some species will actually eat them. And that was surprising to me, but here it is for your own eyes. There are several species. I mean, there's nectar in them, so why not? But it also hosts several species of butterfly and moth. And I kind of made a happy discovery last year when I found the morning glory prominent munching away on the leaves of my redbud in my front yard. Had a really amazing color, and I don't know, I was lucky to even see him. His camouflage was so good. But that's not all though. The seeds from the redbud will be eaten by various birds like cardinals and quail, as well as squirrels. In fact, when I talk about saving seed, I'll talk about this more in detail, but you don't want to just assume that the pods will be there all winter. You know, there was a place I knew with loads of redbud trees, and I figured I'd go collect seed, and I went down there in early October. The seeds weren't ripe. I came back in, I don't know, late November, and there was no pods anywhere. They'd all been stripped. I assume by squirrels storing food away for the winter. This is one last pro I guess I forgot to mention. They are fairly deer resistant. I have several planted in my backyard in the woods, and deer don't really seem to bother them at all. Okay, so I'm going to jump into cons here in a second, but I want to point out that if you're enjoying this video, please click the like button down in the corner, as that's a really easy way for you to help me out, and I thank you greatly. But there's a couple of cons that we need to talk about. Disease. So the eastern redbud is susceptible to several funguses and other diseases like verticillium wilt. And these can prove fatal if not caught early. I suspect that most disease problems with the eastern redbud is due to open wounds from branches falling off during storms and then having insect feet be the vector for the disease when they land on the open wound. But we'll talk about that more in this video later on. Redbuds are reported to have a short lifespan. And this is primarily, again, due to diseases or poor pruning techniques. Many redbuds, they say, may only live 20 years. Now, if you keep theirs healthy, though, it should live 50 to 75 easily. That's estimated by Charles Hatch in a 2007 book, which was on the California redbud, which we are very similar to. Now, I can say that many people in my area have redbuds in their yards, and they are 20 plus years old. I mean, these trees, they seem to last a lot longer than what's reported there. Okay, so we're about to jump into identification, characteristics, and growing conditions. But I want to point out that all the information I'm about to give you exists as an article on my website. Just Google redbud, grow it, build it, and you'll find it in no time. How to identify a redbud? Well, the easiest way is to just look when it's blooming. If you see a tree along the edge of a forest that's covered in tiny pink and white flowers, then you've probably got a redbud. But what if it's not blooming? Let's take a look at a few other ways to ID this tree. So for the trunk and bark. Well, when a redbud's grown in full sun, the form of the eastern redbud will grow into a wide vase shape, often with multiple trunks, and they are somewhat irregular in the path they take. If you find them in the deep woods or the edge of the forest, it will often have long skinny trunks that arch and lean as they're reaching for the sun. When it comes to bark, young bark is smooth with white splotches on it, while mature bark is more furrowed with scales. More similar to like a black cherry tree, but not quite as scaly. All right, so for flowers, we've talked about the overall inflorescence of the tree, but let's take a look at individual flowers and their clusters. So an individual flower is legume shaped, and they're going to occur in groups of 2 to 8, roughly on right along the branch, right along the trunk. Now they start out with these little round pink buds that form eventually into these pink and white or dark magenta white flowers on 3/4 inch stems. And the blooming period for redbuds usually starts about the time Virginia bluebells are starting to fade, and the blooms will last for, a good solid 2 weeks. The leaves are probably the easiest way to identify a redbud that's not blooming. They're alternate along the stalk, and they are heart-shaped with smooth edges, roughly 2 to 5 inches long and wide. And this really is the easiest way to identify them. If you see a tree with fairly decent-sized heart-shaped leaves, you probably have a redbud. And also in autumn, they will turn a shade of yellow before fading to brown eventually. Now, not that you can identify it by roots, but I thought I'd say something about the root system of a redbud tree. Most of the time, almost all the time in fact, the root system of a redbud tree will be a taproot with wide, woody lateral roots. It is possible for them to not have a taproot though, or have the taproot grow horizontally. And that's kind of what happened to the first one I grew. It spent its first growing season in a container when I transplanted it in late summer, early fall, and then I moved the whole redbud tree several years later after cutting down my evil Bradford pear tree. When I did this, I was fully prepared for a taproot. I had a digging iron in hand, I was ready to excavate a taproot really deep, but there just wasn't one. I don't know why, but this is the entire root system of that tree in November when I'm moving it. And just briefly, why did this happen? Well, I can tell you that other species of trees may or may not grow a taproot depending on their conditions. There's some species that in drier areas, they make taproots, while in more moist areas, they don't bother. There's a lot of other trees that will grow a taproot initially only to shed it after, some years, like oaks. Just take my experience for your own information. Yeah. All right, so let's talk about growing conditions. For growing conditions, eastern redbud will do best in full sun or part sun. It is possible for it to grow in full shade, but it really isn't the best choice, as it will be long, skinny, and arching, and probably break after 10 years or so. Oh, and shaded trees don't make as many flowers. But, full sun, part sun, it's absolutely the best. When it comes to moisture, it can do well in slightly moist to slightly dry soils. It's very adaptable. If you're on the drier side, though, you might want to consider the Texas or Mexican redbud, as I mentioned earlier. But the biggest factor to consider for most people is how the soil drains. You want your soil to be well drained. This tree doesn't do well in flooding, and you don't want it sitting in constant moisture all the time. If you need help checking your soil texture or drainage, I've got a couple videos on that I will link to in the cards on the right and in the notes below. All right, landscaping. When it comes to landscaping, there really isn't any secret. Put the tree in the growing conditions that it likes and prune it as needed. The key factors for redbud is to give it some sun, make sure the soil can drain, and that it isn't prone to severe drought and doesn't get too wet. If you meet these factors, then you'll probably be just fine to grow this tree. And it's amazing as a single specimen or used to line a fence or a driveway. It puts on an incredible show in spring. The foliage and leaves look good throughout the season until fall. All right, so how do we care for redbuds? Well, they really don't require much special care. They don't require any kind of fertilizer ever, and as long as you put them in the proper growing conditions, they'll be just fine. But for actual care, what do we need to worry about? Well, we need to worry about the limbs breaking off or the trunk breaking off, and we need to worry about disease. And the disease actually will come from insects landing on freshly opened wounds from limb breaking off, or if someone pruned it out of season, aka insects were active. And why does this happen? Well, we need to go back and think about how a redbud actually grows. So redbuds have those vase-like shape where it grows up and then out. And as it grows further and further out away from the main trunk, the load on the main trunk gets heavier and heavier. And eventually it will break from a lot of snow or a heavy storm or any number of things. Eventually the load just gets to be too big, and that will lead to a fresh open wound for an insect to enter. So we can control this loading by pruning our trees appropriately to make sure the branches don't get too far away from the main trunk, and also making sure that there aren't any narrow angle branches that are coming off the main trunk. A small angle between a branch and the main trunk, like this one here, I'm probably going to have to take this one down in a year or two. For pruning, when is the proper time? Well, you want to prune redbuds in late winter after the coldest parts have passed. For me in southern Pennsylvania, this is going to be in late February to early March, because the insects are dormant, so even if I leave open wounds out there, no insect's going to land on it. If you do have to deal with a limb breaking or something like that during the growing season though, you can always wrap some shade cloth around it like this and just tie it off. That'll allow the wound to breathe, but it'll keep insect feet away. As far as what branches to prune, any branches that have a narrow angle with the trunk you'll want to get rid of, or branches that are rubbing or anything that just fell off and broke. Now obviously you want to sterilize your tools with rubbing alcohol before you use them. Down below in the description I will link to a very good guide on how to prune trees in the description. Okay, so let's talk about how to save redbud seeds and then germinate it. So the flowers from redbuds will change to these seed pods. They're a legume, right? The pea family. First they're going to turn green, but eventually they'll be brown by late summer, early fall. And as soon as they turn brown and start to dry out, you can go harvest them. Take them directly from the tree, put them in a Ziploc bag, assuming they're dry, and put them in the fridge until you're ready to scarify and winter sow them. You want to keep them sealed up in a sealed container though. Ziploc bag works fine. Alright, so for growing it from seed, the eastern redbud seeds have two dormancy mechanisms that prevent premature germination. First, they have a hard outer shell that needs to be penetrated, and they also need cold stratification, in a cold, moist environment, which is like going through a winter. So we need to scarify them and cold stratify them or winter sow them. The best way to scarify eastern redbud seeds is a boiling water method. I've done experiments on this, you might have seen that video, but fill a coffee cup with some water and then dump it into a pot and boil it. While that's boiling, put your redbud seeds into the coffee cup. Then remove the hot water off the boil and slowly count to 10. You want it to slightly cool between 10 and 30 seconds. Then pour that really hot water into the cup and let it sit on the kitchen counter for 24 hours. After 24 hours, check to see if the seeds have absorbed water. This is easy to do if you kept one seed dry. As you can see, the size difference is pretty substantial. A seed that successfully imbibed the water will swell up, while ones that didn't are the same size. And if your seeds didn't imbibe water, just repeat the process until they do so. I've had it take 2 or 3 times before. For cold stratification, the seeds need to go through a cold period of roughly 2 months or 60 days. This can be done via the fridge. I would suggest you use moist sand as the medium to put them in, since the seeds are large. I have a video on how to do this and will place a card in the top right. I personally find it easier to winter sow the seed rather than using the refrigerator. And to do that, you just plant your redbud seeds 1/8 to 1/4 inch deep in an appropriate size container, 5-6 inches deep, and then place it somewhere cold, but don't let it freeze for prolonged periods. I like to keep the container in an unheated garage or shed for the coldest parts of winter before moving it back out in the spring to a place with morning sun and afternoon shade. Now, during this winter, don't let the soil completely dry out, and if you're just using an open pot like I am here, plan on giving it small amounts of water each week. Just a little bit of water every Sunday is all you need. And, pick up the pot to determine how heavy it is, whether or not it's dry. But once spring approaches, move the containers outside in a location that gets morning sun and afternoon shade. The germination is going to occur once it warms up outside, and it usually corresponds when the redbuds start blooming, coincidentally enough. Growing them from seed is a great way to get them because it's free, it's not too terribly difficult to do, and since they grow so fast, you can expect to have a full flowering tree in 5 to 7 years based on my experience. Alright, time to review. The eastern redbud is a deciduous hardwood native to North America and a member of the legume family. It is absolutely one of the showiest trees native to this continent and one of the few pink flowering types. It grows upwards of 2 feet per year in optimum conditions, topping out at 20 to 30 feet tall and can tolerate full sun to part shade. And also it is adaptable to most soil types as long as they drain well and aren't too drought prone. It benefits pollinators by providing nectar and pollen, hosts several species of moth and butterfly, and the seeds are fed on by various birds, squirrels, and mammals. And you almost can't go wrong with landscaping with this tree. It'll pretty much look good anywhere you put it, whether it's in a prominent specimen or a pink accent in some open woods. But that's all I got for you today. I hope you enjoyed this, as this is one of the most shockingly gorgeous trees to North America and quite possibly my favorite. And it does benefit the local ecosystems as well as its beauty. If you want to help me out, please go check out my article on this tree by Googling Redbud Grow It Build It and then clicking on the like button below. If you have any questions at all, please ask them in the comments and I will do my best to answer them. All right, now, you guys all have a good one.